Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started with our second panel today. We have a exciting panel for ESG. My name is Chris Fries. I am the Chief Risk Officer of our Benefits and Protection Division here at Principal Financial Group in Des Moines, Iowa. I've been in financial services and with the firm for 30 years now, so definitely I've seen a lot of things over the years, actuary by background and such. And so with us, we have three guests today, panelists. And you only see two here. We have one that's dialing in from London, and we're going to start with him and Chris Reddy. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Chris?
Yeah, hi. I see the chair where I'm supposed to be sitting, so I'll apologize to all of you that I'm not able to be there live and in person. I had a business trip to London to come up at the last minute. My name's Chris Reddy. I'm part of Principal Asset Management Division of the Principal Financial Group. I've been with the firm over 37 years in various roles. Right now, I'm responsible for three of our investment teams: Spectrum Asset Management, which looks after preferred securities; Post Advisory Group, that looks after sub-investment grade debt and CLOs; and here in London, Origin Asset Management, international, emerging, and regional equities. I also lead our sustainable investing strategy across Principal Asset Management, and I'm a member of Principal Financial Group's ESG or Sustainability Task Force.
Great, thank you. We'll turn it over to Sam. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks. My name is Sam Block. I'm with MSCI. MSCI is a financial services provider. A lot of our bread and butter is in the index business, analytics, and also ESG. And I'm part of the ESG research team at MSCI, part of the North American leadership team. And I focus my research mostly on the materials sector, so metals and mining companies, paper and forestry companies, packaging companies, et cetera. Yeah, my background is environmental engineering, but I've been with MSCI ESG Research for about 14 years. And yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. And last but not least.
Yes, good morning. So I'm the one that came prepared formally with some slides, so you please forgive me. My name is Renee Sedlacek-Lee, and I serve as Senior Program Manager for ESG Stakeholder Engagement, which is a mouthful, at Workiva. My background, actually just 5 months ago, my office was in this building on the lower level. So I have spent a career in community impact and stakeholder engagement as it relates to driving value for colleges and universities, and I made the transition over to Workiva in May. So who is Workiva? If we can go to the next slide. Workiva is a reporting platform that brings together in an assured, integrated, cloud-based system, financial reporting, ESG, audit, and risk. For many of us that are in ESG or dabbling a toe, this is often what the landscape looks like of ESG reporting. So we have points of data coming from different sources, often via email, connected through spreadsheets, fat-fingered mistakes happen, etc., which creates a lot of risk and distrust in our data. And of course, investors and other stakeholders and customers are looking for verified, trusted, assured data. If you go to the next slide. So that's where Workiva comes in. So as I mentioned, we are a cloud-based platform, and our fit-for-purpose tech solutions streamline this process into one unified, controlled, secure, and audit-ready cloud-based platform to make it easier and simplify trust. Next slide. So just a little bit more about who Workiva is. We are homegrown out of the Hawkeye State, or maybe I should say the Cyclone State, because we are based in Ames. We were founded back in 2008 as a company for financial reporting. Our first product went into market in 2010. And in 2014, we became Workiva. And where we have scaled to is about 5,800 customers across 170 countries. So we are truly a global company. We have 19 offices, around 3,000 employees. And as you can see on the screen, innovation is something that we take really seriously. And we truly believe that technology is part of the process in transforming the future and landscape of ESG. Next slide. I'll leave us with this, which is in 2023, just this summer, we engaged in a practitioner survey with ESG practitioners. This is anybody who's in the ESG space, so not just ESG reporting people, but the CFO, the CSO, et cetera. 926 professionals engaged in this. And if you go to the next slide, it was kind of shocking to see some of the results. So we know that 71% of respondents agree that this landscape we are all navigating is complex. 90% believe that technology is going to be critical to solving those challenges. Even more interesting is the disconnect we see between executives who say, yeah, our ESG reporting is just as quality as our financial reporting, versus only 32% of managers who think the same. So we've got some work to do in terms of cleaning this up and making our data more trusted and verified.
Great, thank you. That was a great lead-in, in fact, setting us up well for a series of questions I'll start with for panelists, and certainly while directing the questions, if others have perspectives, feel free to redirect at the conclusion. Chris, the first one I'll send to your way. Can you share a bit about the philosophy that Principal has for managing ESG-related risks for our clients, your clients, I'm sorry, investment portfolios and their particular interests, and how is that similar or different with respect to Principal overall and how it thinks about
Sure.
ESG?
Sure, right. So thanks, Chris. So I would echo the prior speaker's comments about there's a lot of chaos out there in terms of data and understanding around ESG. And so to try to create some clarity, I'd ask you all to think about Principal through three different lenses. Principal as a business or as an enterprise, right? How do we conduct ourselves? What's our impact on employees, our stakeholders and shareholders, and on the environment, right? We don't generate a lot of carbon impact because we're an insurance and an asset manager, but we have a lot of impact on people's lives through our products and services. So our Principal Financial Group has adopted a sustainability strategy of harnessing the power of our people by giving them a great work environment, respect and trust, diversity and inclusion, caring for the communities that we work at. We harness and embed sustainable practices in how we conduct our business. And we also make sure that our products are advancing financial inclusion to achieve our end strategy of financial security for all. Our asset management business deals with third-party client assets, right? And we have to align to Principal Financial Group's strategy. We manage bespoke assets for large clients where they drive their objectives for the return and for how much ESG integration is desired in their product. We also have collective vehicles, mutual funds, ETFs, UCITS funds, which are offshore, not in the U.S. for offering. Our primary focus as an asset manager is to meet the fiduciary obligations that we have to meet the client objectives and provide the appropriate return. But we also have to provide flexibility and choice for our clients because we're a global organization. So there may be pension funds in the United States who have a fiduciary view. You ignore all ESG, focus on pecuniary returns only. There are fiduciaries in Netherlands that are our clients who say, if you don't focus on ESG activity or analysis, you're not pursuing and fulfilling your fiduciary obligation. A financial advisor in Switzerland may have a different client set than one in Florida or California. And so we design our products to meet those needs. We're not a one-size-fits-all solution. We've developed a classification system for ESG integration levels to help clients understand that and meet their needs. The old-fashioned way was screening. Screen out sin stocks, screen out fossil fuels, lean into something, build up the portfolio that way. We then look at the basic level of ESG integration, which illustrates an E, an S, or a G variable and shows the impact, but that's about it. That's fundamental risk management in an investment portfolio. We then have ESG enhanced integration, which says we're going to do all the basic risk metrics, but we're also going to over-index on something, perhaps climate transition, perhaps clean water, and we'll disclose that. We then have thematic products, and those generally will say exactly what they are: a climate transition fund, a sustainable food fund, diversity and equity and inclusion fund. And then at the other end of the spectrum, impact, where the end objective, the end goal, is more important than the financial return. A small select set of investments, let's say inner city housing development to help reduce homelessness. That's the primary goal. The returns are secondary. So it's really about understanding and classifying the needs. The last lens is as an asset owner. Principal Life Insurance Company has a large general account, and Dennis Mencken, who spoke at the conference yesterday, is responsible for that. And we work with Dennis's team as to how he's integrating ESG into his holdings, which is complex because many of the investments were made quite some time ago. Many of the investments are private, not public securities. And so we have to work with him to give him the data he needs to be able to meet the objectives.
Great, thank you very much. And in fact, this maybe is a good segue, and Sam, to you a little bit. If you could talk a little bit about, you heard Chris talk about how he deals with each of those pillars and the risks and sort of categorization and utilization. But can you talk about general approach and philosophy of your firm and how it looks at ESG related risks and how that's changing through time?
Yeah, thank you. So our goal is to provide ESG data, information, ratings to clients to help them better inform their own investment decisions and investment objectives. And as you heard, there's a wide variety of options there, oftentimes even within the same firm. And so we have to offer a lot of different products, and yeah, we in a similar way, we kind of look at ESG kind of in three different buckets. One is the traditional, let's screen out companies because they don't agree with our values. Maybe it's a church fund and they say we don't want to invest in certain things that we just find morally objectionable. Or it could be on the impact side because they want a financial return, but as part of the goal, but obviously, but also want social environmental benefits. And I would say though that the biggest use case traditionally of ESG has been on the integration side of looking at how does ESG impact kind of the risk return profile of an investment of a company. And that's really where our ESG ratings come in. That's the focus on ESG ratings. And the general philosophy is that, if a company or entity is creating some negative harm into the world, that's bad for business. They might be able to get away with it for a while, but eventually it's gonna have repercussions, and the repercussions are probably going to be the worst for the largest contributors. And so that's our general approach. And when we come up with our ratings, we look to see what are the industries that are contributing the most to certain negative externalities, whether that's climate change or some social issue, and then we look within their own industry peer set to say, okay, who's best and who's worst. So, we definitely have clients who will say, because we have climate objectives, we won't invest in any oil and gas companies. But we don't take that approach. We say, you can invest in oil and gas companies and still be focused on ESG, but you might want to say who's the best and who's the worst, because, obviously, the investment game is a lot around, risk versus return. So why take risk if you're not going to be compensated for taking that risk, right? So if you're investing in oil and gas companies and you say, the oil price is a very strong factor in the price of the valuation of these companies, and a lot of times these companies are going to be moving in the same direction financially, but if this one company is likely to have more blowups than other companies, why are you going to invest in that company? And so we look to see what are those kind of issues that could have a material impact on companies, and we benchmark them against their industry peers to say who's best and who's worst. And so we take a systematic approach to say to analyze these things and identify both kind of what are the best practices for the different issues that we're looking at, and also kind of what are the indicators we can use to identify risk exposure to the different issues as well. And yeah, and so this is, gets into the point of, I think you kind of mentioned that a lot of managers think that there's not a strong due diligence around some of these ESG reportings, and so that's why it's very important, and a lot of times, companies will say, yes, I looked at climate change, I looked at health and safety, and it's almost like a checkbox exercise. So we're much more focused on kind of the benchmarking approach to say, who's actually doing better and worse, who's more vulnerable or to certain issues, and who's going to be a leader in this space.
Great, thank you. Renee, you demonstrated well in your slides a bit of a spaghetti map, if you will, the complexity. And how does Workiva sort of bring order to the chaos and advise clients to, effectively be transparent and disclose in plain English sort of what's going on?
Yeah, so we got our start with SEC filing, and so we hold about 85% of our customers are Fortune 500s and very familiar with us in the financial reporting space. And so transitioning to ESG was just the natural progression of that. And we have seen then a lot of success then from companies transitioning. You've been doing this for so long with financial, it's only your natural progression to then add ESG reporting to that, because so much of ESG reporting is connected to other areas of your financial reporting. As the slide that I had showed, demonstrates the interest, well, it is complex because you have interest from multiple stakeholders, right? So you have raters and ranking agencies that you might be reporting out to, for example, like MSCI. I'm proud to say that Workiva just received AAA designation or recognition, so thank you. But you also have the stakeholder interests from your investors, from your customers, and from your employees, as Chris was mentioning, right? And how your internal environment is managing these things. I think the other thing that makes it complicated and what we're seeing right now is so much of this work has been voluntary up to this point, and now it's turning towards regulatory, right? So we're seeing CSRD, the California Climate Disclosure, we're waiting on SEC. So as regulation comes into this space, it's going to be even more important that the data be verifiable, right? That there's third-party assurance. It's not just, yep, I counted up, the number of light bulbs on my sticky note and put it into a report. Our data's got to get a lot more trusted, if you will. So as the slide shared, I think it was just a perfect depiction. Workiva's platform allows the integration of that data in a seamless platform. And what's different about like me sitting up here versus, just someone else, like Workiva actually uses Workiva for our own reporting. So we just published our first impact report. You can find that on workiva.com/sustainability. And we use the Workiva platform to produce that report. We're using it to collect and tell the story of our ESG impact. And so what that allows is, and the very unique piece to our platform is it creates a single source of truth. And so you put a piece of information, a data point, into the system once. From that one point, we have patented a thing called the link, super innovative name. Technical name, right? A link. It's called the source linking, that then allows that one data point to be shared across hundreds of different pieces within your platform. And so you're only updating it in one place. You click it, and then it automatically updates everywhere else. So it takes out the challenges that often exist when you're managing a piece of data over here and you update it, but you forgot to update it over here. Maybe we have slide decks. It looks very similar. I probably shouldn't even say this, but it looks similar if you're familiar with Microsoft. It's very similar to that, right? We have slide decks, spreadsheets, your word processing documents. But the difference is it's all unified into one piece. And so as I was updating those slides, for example, I can pull data in from my Word doc and not have to go recreate the wheel. So efficiency, time saving is another huge piece that we help simplify in the process.
Great, sounds integrated very much.
Yep.
Turning the page a bit here, Chris, can you talk a bit, because you're probably on the front lines of this, it doesn't seem like a day goes by without ESG getting in the headlines for a variety of reasons.
Yep.
And mostly from a controversial point of view, it seems like, because that's in more interesting news, I suppose. How has this really sort of impacted the work you do or the clients' requests and mandates and things of that sort?
Sure. Chris, you used the word headlines. And I would say what we hear in the US are the headlines, and we hear sort of the political slogans. You need to go one level down and look at what's happening at the working level. I was just in Japan 2 weeks ago at the annual UN Principles of Responsible Investing Conference. Largest number of attendees ever, 1,300 from something like 50 countries. Signatories to the UN PRI are up. Sustainable assets that they record are up. Sustainable assets, as Morningstar tracks them in the United States, up 11% through the end of November 30th. Public awareness, pro or con, it is up. In the US, we all understand there's sort of a red state, blue state divide. You go to a red state, there's one view, sort of anti-ESG. You go to a blue state, there's kind of one view, much more pro ESG. I'd ask you to draw the distinction from the US versus the rest of the world. There's an extraordinary commonality of all in on many things ESG. Even despite the surging petrol prices that occurred because of the Ukraine-Russia conflict, everywhere I go in Europe, people are talking about energy independence, fossil fuel independence, so that they're not subject to that sort of price spike by exogenous issues such as a war. So in the US, I think you're actually seeing progress made. It's being made perhaps more quietly, perhaps more at the working level. I think everybody's aware certain red states attorneys general said, hey, we're going to ban organizations from managing our pension funds because they've signed up to certain global climate pacts. But one of those states just awarded a $200 million climate transition mandate to one of those managers because there was an ability to sort of say, yeah, this is fit for purpose, we'll make an exception. So headlines and political bumper stickers, working level, draw the distinction. US, rest of the world, huge distinction. And we're global, so we have to be able to meet multiple clients' requirements, and we're not forcing anybody into having their assets do things that are counter to what their objective and return is, right? Our fiduciary responsibility first and foremost.
Great. That's a good reminder for the fact that headlines don't always tell all the story. Sam, maybe if there's anything that you want to add on to that, but just maybe just to broaden that out a little bit too. Can you talk about the effect that ESG ratings have on companies and the behavior that drives, and just sort of what you see?
Yeah. Well, first, I do want to second, a lot of the comments I heard from Chris is, first of all, when we hear criticism on ESG outside the U.S., usually the criticism is saying that ESG is just not going far enough. It's not sustainable enough. So when we hear the politics here in the U.S., it tells a different story. But again, we also have our own little stories where we know that some of these pension funds that say are very the states are very critical against ESG, and they were in the headlines. When we actually talked to some of them are clients, and some of them will say, yeah, ESG is a buzzword that we can't talk about, but we still want to talk about climate, we still want to talk about labor management, we still want to talk about health and safety. Those are all ESG. So it just depends on how you want to approach it. So there's that. So then, and to answer your question, so, because, when I started, and I would tell people I was in ESG, no one had any idea what that was. And now I am at the point where everyone has an opinion about it, but still might not know that much about what it is. But because ESG has grown so much, especially over the past couple of years, it's accelerated a lot. There's major impacts to companies in terms of whether they're viewed as a sustainable company having strong ESG rating or not. It filters in through many ways. I mean, the biggest adoption of ESG is investors, and so follow the money. So in a lot of ways, Companies that are viewed as being poor in ESG might have lower valuations because investors just, large institutional investors are saying, well, we just don't want to invest in them. They may face divestments, or they may just get to points of, a lot of pressure from their investors that say, well, we want to keep a seat at the table, and we want to influence the company, and so they'll engage them about certain issues. But if they don't think that they're getting the progress that they expect, they're they may act in the proxy season, or they may divest, and so there's a lot of impacts, and definitely we've seen companies making behavioral changes. A lot of oil and gas companies have been investing a lot and transitioning to say, we're not oil and gas, we're energy companies, and they're investing a lot more into renewables. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there's been a lot of changes that we've seen because of the pressure, and it's not just coming from investors. If a company is producing a product that is going to be seen as contributing negatively to the world, maybe it's plastic waste. Regulators are starting to act against these things, but also consumers as well. And then so there's the trifecta of stakeholders that are focused on sustainability: regulators, consumers, as well as investors, and it has a lot of impacts on the companies.
Great, thank you. Sam just mentioned regulators, Renee, and you've spoken a bit about just the effort that you're outputting to integrate, if you will, a lot of the disparate systems that a filer might have, or what are things of that sort. As we think about some of the things in motion right now around SEC or other regulatory bodies, what are you see as those changing expectations, and how are companies sort of positioning themselves to comply, and what's the lift going to look like?
Yeah, so I think it can be best summed up as this isn't a matter of if, this is a matter of when. And what we're seeing is that companies are, especially with, for example, this movement in California, right, the climate disclosure law that just happened. So traditionally, if you're a publicly traded company, you were paying more attention to this stuff than, let's say, a private company. But we're finding even private companies are now going to be impacted, right? Because they do business in California, or maybe they have operations in Europe as well. They're going to be held to the same standards as publicly traded companies regardless. And so they need to figure out how they're going to tell the story and disclose the information. So once again, that's where we're starting to see interest on the reporting side from companies that otherwise they might be having sustainable practices and care about these things, but haven't been disclosing or reporting on it to the same level. And so regulation is certainly pushing that energy in that direction. The other thing that we're seeing is, like I mentioned, the be ready, but it's not a matter of if, but when, is that the supply chain, the conversation around supply management is huge right now. And so this isn't just an issue, and I think we've done a really good job of helping really large companies try to figure this out. What are we going to do with the smaller companies, right, that now have to report all of this stuff up to the manufacturer that they supply? Because what's happening is the manufacturer is being held accountable to say, like, okay, how are you reducing everything in your supply chain? Well, that now impacts the small farmer, the small business down at the very granular level. And so our reporting is we're going to have to be very careful on how to do this in a way that's not adding, check boxes or more labor, because I think then we could get into, people reporting. It just can be a lot of labor and time consuming, and people are either going to do it or not going to do it. I don't think it's a matter of people. I think there is a lot of sentiment in the U.S., obviously, around ESG, negative or positive. That's a little bit different than across the world. But in my experience, being on this side of it now, I haven't come across someone who's not authentic in their desires to make their company be as ethical and sustainable as possible, right? It's not about taking advantage of people or this or hiding things. It truly is like, what's good for business is good for the world, and what's good for the world is good for business if done well and done right. So,
Great, thank you. Got a couple jump ball questions here, and then certainly we'll welcome any our audience participation. But maybe on your last point about most people doing the right thing, there's been a little bit of headlines over the years. It's not all the time, but there's a thing called greenwashing. Maybe Chris, I'll start with you. Can you just define that a little bit, and sort of any thoughts around sort of what that means for the effort here?
Sure. Look, I can define it, but I think it's better if we go to a third party that a lot of folks in the investment industry go to a website called Investopedia. And it's defined there, and I thought it was pretty good. It's an attempt to capitalize on the growing demand for environmentally sound products. It can convey a false impression that a company or its products are overly environmentally conscious or friendly, or just environmentally conscious or friendly if they're not. Some companies have been accused of greenwashing to capitalize on the movement that occurred over the last several years. And really the counter to that is products that sort of do what they say on the tin are able to prove that with the data and analytics that MSCI provides. They're a data provider to many of our investment teams, and with the reporting and documentation that the Workiva system provides, and full disclosure principles uses Workiva to produce certain of our reports. So this is an integrated system, but it's integrated to avoid greenwashing at the end of the day.
Great. Anything to add from MSCI or Workiva perspective?
Well, there has been this has been a particular focus in Europe that we've seen, and the regulators are cracking down on any funds, for instance, that try to claim sustainability. They're being very specific in terms of what qualifies, and it can't be just even, you're a renewable energy company and you automatically qualify. You have to also prove that you're not doing significant harm. And so there's a lot of, and that it's really coming to the point of, cracking down on greenwashing. And we definitely have seen a lot more reporting from companies focused on ESG. And that's obviously great to have the more details from the companies themselves, but a lot of times they're putting out messaging, and they're just trying to put their best foot forward. For instance, we did a study recently where we looked at packaging companies, and we saw like 90% of them started talking about circular economy, and they were talking about this. When we dig into it, only about 50% of the companies actually even had targets around to improve, to get closer to a circular economy, and it was like maybe 5% actually were even on their path to meet their own targets. And so that's, to me, a quintessential, example of, greenwashing is out there for sure, and we just have to kind of get insight to better understand the details here. And I think in a lot of ways the world is moving in that way, where we have to, kind of get that better insight with, with AI and deep fakes that are possible out there nowadays. It's like sometimes you have to take a systematic approach and take an appropriate way to verify, what's real and what's not. And sometimes that's why, I'll go back and say, that's why I think the benchmarking approach is very important, and looking at particular metrics as well as, all the other glossy things that companies like to put out there.
Yeah, it's also, I'll add back to the conversation around regulation, why we're seeing more regulation, right? So up until this point, so much of this work was voluntary. And therefore, you have, this perceived pressure, if you will, from society that you need to move in this direction. Why would you not then try to move in that direction? But as we've talked about, it's complicated. You don't just throw these things together, and it takes a lot of time. And so we're starting to, it's like a pendulum swing, and I think we saw a lot more of the greenwashing maybe at the beginning, but as regulation comes into play, that's going to get tougher and tougher to do, which then brings the pendulum back over to the center.
Great, thank you. Maybe the crystal ball moment here. As you look at towards the future and all the things going on, what are your thoughts about how either the regulatory changes or market developments are going to impact the work you do and the markets you're in? Maybe start at the end. Then we're Sam.
Sure. I mean, yeah, to the regulatory space, there's a lot more demand on disclosures in a variety of different things, and sometimes they can be political, and sometimes they can just be, which just give a lot more information. Um, but to a certain extent, the ESG reporting out there is still sort of the Wild West. Companies, it's still voluntary for the most part, and how they report different metrics is also can be different. In many cases, companies will report, their ESG metrics in a different approach than they'll report their financial metrics, equitable or consolidated, and oftentimes they'll choose whichever makes them look better, and so we have to be really, focused to make sure that we don't, just take whatever that they're telling us right off the bat. We have to be a little more insightful there. I would also say that technology is growing, of course, and we're increasingly using new technology to help us in these assessments, and we can't rely just on company disclosures. Already, I think ESG disclosures only fit about 20% of our model. There's another 20 or so percent that come just like regulatory reporting in terms of like the business activities the companies are involved in, and different metrics that we can pull from, traditional financial reporting. And then the rest though comes from like what we call alternative data, and that's from data we pull from just the web, news sources, regulators, NGOs, things like that, and that sort of alternative data is going to increasingly give us that insight that we need. We're increasingly using machine learning to pull in data and just and in the future, maybe this data will be a lot more real time to give us a lot more real time reaction, ability to manage these issues. So.
I appreciate how you teed me up very nicely around technology. So certainly at the core of Workiva is innovation. We just released generative AI in our platform. And so I think one of the pieces that we're seeing is regulation. I mean, you mentioned the Wild Wild West. This landscape's changing every single day, and it's really hard to keep on top of what is the new changing, rule, legislation, et cetera. So we have teams, of subject matter experts who this is all they focus on, product teams that are really focused on making sure that our product then is set up to be the most in real time ready solution. And so, for example, we bring in frameworks into our platform, and like the UN SDGs, for example, piloting with companies like we just did with CDP this last year, right? Figuring out how to API into their solution to make it easier to then report to that framework. And so that's going to continue. So as the landscape continues to grow, then our product becomes more robust and more refined as well. I wanted to impart just one piece of advice for anyone who's looking to get into ESG, or maybe you've just started. As we mentioned, it's complex. There's a lot of things going on. It's like eating an elephant. You don't do it all in one sitting. And I don't know who eats elephant, but whatever. We all know that that's the phrase, right? You eat one bite at a time. And so as we set our ESG targets and looked at what is our reduction method for scope 1 emissions or scope 3, for example, we knew we couldn't do it all at once. So we prioritized and we picked what can we achieve in this year, for example. Well, we can offset our upstream leased assets, right? And that's what we disclosed. That's a number we're proud of. Now this year, how can we move the needle a little bit on reducing emissions around employee travel, business travel, right? And what does that look like? It's a path towards progress, not perfection. So start somewhere, do it with diligence, do it with assurance, and continue the journey one bite at a time.
Great words of advice. Chris, thoughts from your end?
Yeah, my team has adopted that mantra: progress, not perfection. But there's a guiding principle, and that is pragmatism along the way. And I saw that at the UNPRI conference 2 weeks ago, where there were a number of sort of demographics there. There was the governmental academic demographic. There was the asset owner demographic, the practitioner or investment manager demographic, and then my term, not theirs, I would call it the idealist, right? The folks who want to do everything to eliminate fossil fuel and very, very activist on that. We had a conversation around one of the cleanest forms of any energy production, I think germane to Iowa, wind turbines, right? So 4 major parts of a wind turbine: the stanchion, the blades, the turbine engine itself, and the transmission line. Focus on the turbine engine itself. The internal part that makes it work is a huge ball bearing assembly made out of metal. Metal's forged with fossil fuels. To make the ball bearings sustainable for that purpose, they have to reheat it 13 hours at 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit using liquid natural gas. Once the whole thing is assembled and before it's inserted, and the goal is 20 million rotations before they have to kind of fix it, the whole ball bearing assembly is dipped in oil. Put it in, it protects it from the environment, it makes it lubricate. Idealists would say, well, we should eliminate the oil and the lubricant from that process, right? Turbines are a very clean and effective and cost-effective way to generate energy. Another example, Lego. Every kid loves Legos. Lots of adults love Legos. They said, you know what? We're going to commit to find a sustainably produced Lego block, no longer plastic. And we're going to try and do that by 2025 or 2026. They just came back and said, we're still going to commit to do it. We can't figure it out that quickly. We've tried. We need more time. So I think there's going to be pragmatism coming in. I think there's also going to be a harmonization. I hope there's going to be a harmonization of regulatory environments. The reason you got some greenwashing in places and the reason you got a bit of a wild, wild west was because there weren't guidelines that were consistently understood. And so if we can all agree on what's ESG integration, what's thematic, what's impact, that'll go a long way to helping. But in the interim, these two service providers and partners are very, very helpful for what we do. But our mantra to our investment teams, say what you do, show how you do it, show the results, show improvement over time. Discuss it clearly, document the hell out of it, and disclose. And if you follow those rules, I think we'll get to that. We'll have progress. We'll have pragmatic progress. Somebody's going to define perfection for me because I don't know what that is.
Oh, great. No, those are great words of advice there. We have about 5 minutes or so. Any questions from the audience? You guys did such a wonderful job, I guess.
Do we take questions from online?
I don't know if we have any online or not. Oh, there's a question there. So.
We have one question.
Okay, thanks for the session here. And full disclosure, I work at MSCI. I'm Sam's colleague. But I think just hypothetically speaking, for firms that are new to ESG and climate, what words of wisdom can you give to them in some of the initial steps in understanding their exposures?
And whoever wants to take that, Sam, you're probably off the hook, right?
Chris, do you want to start? You've been at this a little bit longer.
Look, there's no magic answer to that. You can bring in consultants who know better than you as to where you should be looking. Where do you have emissions? Understanding what scope 1 is, scope 2, scope 3. Understanding that it's a whole lot easier to generate scope 1 measures, scope 2 measures. Very hard to generate scope 3 measures right now. Define your universe. You may say, hey, look, we have operations in 5 states. We're going to start in 1 state on this plant and define sort of our carbon footprint and areas for transition strategies. Again, you can't eat that elephant all in one bite. So just set out your roadmap, report on that roadmap, disclose it, document it. There's lots of resources available for you. You can go on UNPRI sites and understand about how to start your climate journey. You can go on TCFD site. You can go on the MSCI site and get information. Workiva can help. So you're not in this alone, but start small and then grow.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Specifically as it relates to carbon and emission reduction, you gotta do a baseline, right? You gotta first figure out where you're at. Workiva did engage in consultants at the very beginning to help us create that roadmap. Work with someone who is more of an expert in greenhouse gas and carbon accounting. Because it can be complicated and you want to make sure that you're reporting the right numbers. Beyond that, I would say one thing that Workiva has seen as very valuable to our business, and this is where we're transitioning in the field, is doing a materiality assessment as well. So you don't have to report on everything. And in fact, those who do report on everything, I would maybe question, is it greenwashing, or do you really have validity in that data? Because not everything, to Chris's point at the very beginning, is material to your company. Workiva has emissions in terms of employee travel, our facilities, the actual buildings, but we don't own any of our data servers, right? So we're still reporting that out, but that's emissions that are downstream. So what is material to your company? So we engaged in a materiality assessment. Once again, Workiva has some free resources out there on the website that can help with some of that as well. And then from there, and that involves stakeholder engagement and feedback too, to then we reevaluated the roadmap, and we're consistently doing a pulse check to then make sure as we progress towards our targets that we're reevaluating and reestablishing progress.
Great, thank you. Time for just one more question. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Chris. Kind of a question for all three of you as far as Chris laid out a little bit of, U.S. versus other parts of the world from the temperature in the room on this issue. How do we migrate? How do we move forward without upsetting everyone on the earth? Or at least everyone in our country. What words of advice would you have for us migrating forward to make progress, but not create fervor?
I'll start.
Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Sorry. Well, so I'll kind of echo what you said earlier. And I mean, I think the biggest growth we always saw in ESG before all the criticism started was the focus on materiality. And, that's the language of investors. That's the language of risk managers. That's the language people understand that ESG is important. And it doesn't have to be politicized. It can still be very pragmatic and something very important for you to consider in your approach to things. And I think that's it boils down to kind of follow the money. So I think if you're focused on that aspect, the materiality of things, that's where the world is going to say, that makes a lot of sense, and I need to address this. I mean, a materials sector analyst, I can tell you that, if you buy a bond from a mining company and you're dependent on that mining company to expand their mine to pay back that debt, you might want to consider, is the local community, supporting that mine expansion, or are they actively opposing it? If they're actively opposing it, maybe you don't want to, take on, that position. So it's very important to kind of consider what are the material risks, and that's the language of investment world. It doesn't have to be political action or in integrating ESG. And usually when it's done right, it's not. There's plenty of progress we can make just focusing on the materiality side of things.
Nope. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
The ESG nomenclature gave us an ability a few years ago to categorize risk analytics that good fundamental active managers have always been looking at. They've always looked at environmental factors. They've looked at social factors. They've looked at governance factors when they're analyzing a credit or security. that nomenclature helped us categorize them that way. But it's kind of foundational and fundamental to the investment process. Where it got maybe politicized is when folks thought that assets that were theirs were being redirected to accomplish a goal that wasn't tied to their objective. Well, start from the client objective, start from the fiduciary perspective, and you'll go back to the foundation of what are we trying to solve for? Are we trying to solve for investment return and good risk metrics? Then we should really consider ESG factors. If that's it, fine. If you want to do something about the climate, then let's look at a fund that indexes towards climate.
So my gut reaction is we'll never please everybody, right? That's just human nature. But then secondly, to dovetail on the fact that it's human nature, the reality is climate, regardless of what your political views are on it or social views or anything on, these things are going to happen and they're going to progress. And so if you're not taking those into consideration, they are going to affect your bottom line as a company. I was at Climate Week. I had the opportunity to participate with the UN Leaders Summit, and 15% of the world's UN Sustainable Development Goals are not on track. Right? So this was an agenda that was set back in 2015 to say if we're going to progress as a world and be unified and be sustainable for long term, we have to be taking, they did not call it ESG, but essentially ESG type of categories, goals and metrics into consideration, and only 15% are on track to meet by 2030. Right? We've got a lot of work to do because we all live on this planet, and the planet is home to all of us. And so I don't want to say it's about wordsmithing here and there, but I think it comes to figuring out, it comes back to like reciprocity, right? What is it? What is your goal? What is my goal? Where can we meet in the middle? You might call it climate change. I might call it sustainability. Does it matter what we call it as much as it matters that we're attacking the same problem and challenge and working towards a goal together?
Great, thank you very much. We've come to the end of our time today. I want to thank the three panelists and help give me a round of applause for them.